That was the opening few bars of Chopin's Étude in E major, opus 10, number 3. Before we play the piece, each piece, I'm going to pick them apart a little bit and maybe give you some insights as to why I think they're so awesome, and also maybe how the composer has achieved the things that he's trying to in terms of the way they've been written. This is Cats, Chats and 88 Keys. My name is JP. Welcome to my house, to my music room for another episode. This bizarre endeavour that was started out of lockdown and out of a feeling that professional life was disappearing quickly out of the window. It's been such an immense pleasure to bring you these regular concerts the last few months. As lockdown is easing, I'm now overjoyed to welcome some socially distanced friends into the room. So we've got a Timo and Andy here, and the regal Edward, as always. And I didn't really mention him last week, but my Lord and Master Bobby Kay, running the desk over there, without whom none of this would be happening. And of course, my lovely Gabby operating the camera as well. Last time, 2 weeks ago, we did the epic Schubert Sonata. The format of these is that we're going to alternate really in vibes. So we're going to alternate long epic journeys with some concerts of smaller miniatures, and that's what today is. 4 very effective, beautiful works. At least 2 of them I think lots of you will know. One of them maybe some of you will know, and the 4th one I think will hopefully be a wonderful voyage of discovery for you all. There are some ways you can support us if you like what we're doing here. The most obvious one of those is that you can choose to buy a ticket for this concert if you're enjoying it. There was a link in the intro screen that I'm sure many of you saw. There's also a link in the description underneath the Facebook and the YouTube videos. I don't want to ever put this behind a paywall and make it about money stopping people from enjoying wonderful music. So the tickets are optional and the price of the tickets is optional. So it's really whatever you feel comfortable with. But as you can imagine, in these tricky times, anything you can kick in really does make a big difference. And we're also partnering with the wonderful charity Help Musicians and sharing the proceeds with them. So your money will also be going to help not just me, but musicians all over the country as Help Musicians do their incredible work. The last thing you can do to help me is there's a little thumbs up under the video. If you can give that a click, that means you've liked the video. That would be marvellous. And there's a subscribe red button if you're on YouTube. That's gold, really. If you can just give that a hit, that's absolutely blinding. And if you're on Facebook, you can like the page. Follow the page, Cats, Chats and 88 Keys. That would all be incredibly useful. Right, on with the show. I want to give you a little bit of an insight into that opening of the Chopin. It's unbelievably beautiful, as I'm sure you can appreciate. But I think we often don't understand just how much of this incredible music is not random. It hasn't just been delivered from up on high into the composer's mind, but it has a clear and obvious plan. Now, we're in E major, which means E is our starting note. If I just play you this simple rising and falling scale, I'm sure you'll agree that while it's quite nice, it's not particularly remarkable. Big whoop, right? But what he's doing here is actually each of the long notes in the tune is the next note up in that scale, which means that the melody gets this feeling of constantly rising and striving and reaching level upon level. I'll show you what I mean, accenting the main notes in the tune as we go. And then back we come down again. So he actually cheats a little bit at the top, and instead of going to the B, to the 5th note that we're expecting, he makes the music even more achingly beautiful by overreaching it. We're expecting this, and we get... which gives us that wonderful feeling of of overreaching where we're heading, and then when he falls back to the B, it becomes a wonderful sense of release. And that's actually a device that Puccini was incredibly liberal with the use of. It's incredibly effective. So look, it's basically a rising and falling melody, a rising and falling scale, which is super simple but incredibly beautiful with those passing notes and the way it's been organized. Rhythmically, there's some pretty cool stuff going on as well. If we look at the left hand, what he's doing is he's giving a little lean, a little stress on the weak part of the beat. And that really helps us in the feeling of this music never having any vertical lines. I always think that a musical line very much is in conversation with, dialogue with, but often very opposed to the force of gravity. And the lines that move us most of all are the ones that seem to resist the desire to sink back down to earth. So there's all these little cool devices that composers who want to achieve that effect go to in order to make that happen. We're in 2-time here. That means that the first beat of the bar is quite a lot stronger than the second beat. Normally, 1, 2, 1, 2. So what does he do in order to avoid all that verticality on beat 1? He puts all the long important notes on the second beat of the bar, like this. 1, 2, 1, 2. She's very clever. And obviously, I'm not going to be accenting it like that in performance, but the very fact that he's displacing where the stress goes gives us this unbelievable arc. So there's just a few ways that that opening is composed in order to have this incredible effect on us. Now, this was actually one of Chopin's favorite melodies. He even exclaimed when teaching it once, he threw his hands in the air and exclaimed, "Oh, such a beautiful melody, my fatherland." And of course, Chopin's relationship with Poland, his native Poland, was complicated and not the most easy, him having left there at the age of 19, never to return. He even carried a little pot around with him that contained some of Poland's soil, and felt a great sense of longing and missing that country, most heard in his polonaises and mazurkas. And I think while the beginning is so tender, so beautiful, the middle section shows us just some of the stormy darkness that he was feeling as well. Now, on the piano we have the most pure interval is an octave. And that's when you play 2 identical notes, but one higher than the other. And that's so pure sounding because one is exactly twice the frequency of the other. But if we find the exact halfway point of that octave, we get this interval. It's called a tritone. And there was a time when it was known as the devil's interval because of how it split the octave in 2 and it sounded so dissonant. So if we build 2 of those tritones on top of each other, we get this chord, which is a diminished chord. And when Chopin wants to get dark and heavy-handed in this piece, diminished chords come flying out of the traps. Once and then again. It's not just how dissonant the chord in itself is, it's the fact that they're all shifting up and down by tiny intervals, which means we're slaloming from wrenching harmony to wrenching harmony. And I think it's telling how in a lesser composer's hands, this beautiful tune at the beginning would have been very beautiful, would have sat there, and the piece would have unfolded like that. But there's something about these great composers that are never content with just a pretty tune. There has to be a bit more of a struggle. There has to be a bit more of a journey. And so after that moment, when we come back to the opening tune, we feel so much more gratitude for its presence than we did at the beginning. There's one more thing I want to share with you, which is a bit more personal about this piece. I was not a particularly passionately musical child. I didn't have an amazing delight in listening to music. I certainly didn't have an incredible desire to practice all day. I thank my dad very much for making that happen. But there was some things that stick in my mind. And this is a piece that stayed in my mind without me realizing it really, until I then found out actually what it was that I'd remembered all these years. And I remember sitting in our old living room upstairs and listening to a CD of Ad Ashkenazi playing all of these studies. And I don't remember a lot of it, but I remember this opening melody so clearly, and there's one turn of harmony in a phrase at the end of the peaceful opening section where he builds to a big climax. We arrive on an E major chord, and then he slides first to the minor, then to the major, which is also chord 4 at the time, and then back to chord 1. And that is such a touching transition, combined with the chord 4 to chord 1, which is the chords we associate with an Amen in church. So it's so unbelievably heartbreakingly, heart-meltingly peaceful. That has I've never forgotten that my whole life. And I just want to share it with you so you can pin your ears on it when it comes later in the piece. Just leaves you utterly bereft of strength. Marvellous piece. This is for Yvonne and Gemma. Thank you very much for your request. And this is to say to everyone, if you have requests, do fire them into me. And I'm slowly working through the backlog, but it's lovely to have so much beautiful music to choose from and beautiful music to connect to people individually. And Gemma, we're thinking of you, especially in this difficult time for you, and we send all of our love. Yeah, we got a lovely little something from you in the post this morning. You are a total sweetheart. Lots of love. Enjoy some beautiful Chopin. what's interesting about music is that the same kinds of experiences can leave composers with very different takes on them, I guess, very different emotional responses to them. And I think that's something I'd like to explore when looking at this Rachmaninoff against the Chopin that I've just played. I've talked a little bit about Chopin's experience leaving Poland and how he felt about that. I guess you could argue that in some ways it's not exactly the same as Rachmaninoff's experience, in the sense that Chopin could technically have returned to Poland any time. He just didn't. Rachmaninoff left Russia when the revolution started. And this was a wise move, I think. He was descended from quite a noble family. They were decent landowners, despite his slightly feckless father. And there was no doubt, I think, for him, or indeed in reality, that if they hadn't left when they did, things would not have ended well. He managed to use a concert tour offer from Scandinavia to get the papers to escape, and eventually made his way to the US, which he had visited before and already had a kind of reputation there. And he became pretty mega over there, as a conductor, as a pianist, as a composer. And no doubt at all that his reputation flourished from being there. But he was forever a composer in exile, and he never returned to Russia. And I actually can't really imagine what that's like, having lived in the same street my whole life, let alone the same city, country, continent. But we know that this weighed very heavily on him. And you can often hear it in his music. I mean, his music is Russian anyway. Russian music from the time tends to often have a kind of heaviness to it, a world weariness to it. But in this piece, it's extra. And there are anecdotal reasons to suggest that this piece in particular was an expression of his feeling of sadness relative to his country. So this is the Prelude in B minor. It's the 10th from the second set of preludes, is Opus 32. These were composed in 1910, and his first set of preludes had been composed a few years earlier when life had been very good. Rachmaninoff had an interesting kind of journey to stardom, if you like. He was very precocious, he had some early success, but he was prone to bouts of depression. And when his first symphony was quite a big flop, and not a massive flop in terms of the way the critics received it, although some received it very negatively, but he was very displeased with how it had come across. He entered a complete period of barren creativity where he couldn't produce, couldn't really function properly. And it was via a psychotherapist, who helped him break out of that. And the product of that, of course, is his glorious second piano concerto, which was dedicated to the therapist and then shot him well on the way to the big time. But I think in 1910, things were a little bit more difficult for him. And yes, this piece is desolate. What's interesting, I think, in this piece is that it seems there's clearly some kind of playing with time going on here, because he wasn't to leave Russia yet. You know, he wasn't going to leave Russia for another 7 or 8 years. But I wonder if somehow, some way, he already saw the writing on the wall. He said to the great pianist Mozeyevich that this piece specifically just meant one thing to him: the return. And he said it with such sadness in his voice that the pianist was left in no doubt at all that he meant a return that he could never have. But I think it's extraordinary that he should be already being able to access those emotions before the event even happened. So, we're in B minor, which is already a pretty bleak key, and it's an extraordinary work. Some of the ways that he creates this feeling of desolation is by leaving these socking great holes in the middle of bars. So we're in 4 beats in a bar, a slow 4, something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. But nothing really happens on beats 2 and 3. 2 is a very low supporting chord, and 3 we're just left hanging, wondering what on earth's going on. Traditionally, the first beat would be the strongest in a bar and the third would be the second strongest. So the fact that he leaves that blank gives this amazing sense of space and echoey desolation in my mind, certainly. The central section is where things get a bit much. He introduces some throbbing repeated triplets just before the central section begins, and these rise up and eventually overwhelm the melody that he's been trying to sing out over them. But they drown it, they flood it, and the melody has constantly been searching for resolution that frankly never comes. We keep thinking we're getting somewhere, and then the dissonance continues and continues and continues. We keep thinking that each next chord might bring us some relief, but it never does. And eventually we climb and climb and climb and struggle and struggle and struggle, and then we erupt into C major, which has very little to do with B minor. I mean, it's the Neapolitan chord, but when it comes, it sounds like we've just stepped through a chasm in the universe and are no longer in the same world anymore. This very quickly subsides. The opening music returns. There's a short cadenza with some passage work, and then a little coda plays us out, a little kind of final section plays us out. And in the last few bars, we get the ultimate expression of hope to despair as he strives for the major ending that isn't to be. First with the major chord, and then it sinks into the minor. And that happens twice, and the music fades away. He told the same pianist Mozevich that this was his favourite of the preludes. It's a pretty intense, dark, troubled piece to have as your favourite, and I think gives us a good insight into Rachmaninoff, the man. Mighty Russian stuff. Hope you enjoy it. This is for, nearly forgot, this is for Claire. Thank you very much. I know this request happened quite a long time ago, and this is a piece that I only really knew to listen to until you got me on the trail of it. So I really hope you enjoyed. I know you're looking forward to this. Let's do it. It's funny, I said I can't imagine what that feels like to be so exiled. I totally can. That's how. I think, yeah, that's, I mean, obviously there are so many things we love about music, but we can feel all of life in music, and sometimes that's really powerful because it's echoing exactly how we're feeling, and so it's very therapeutic and cathartic and purging for us. But it's also a great vehicle for empathy, because once you dig into the stories behind the music, you start to relate to people and to their stories in ways that I certainly wouldn't. If Rachmaninoff had told me how bad exile was, it wouldn't have been the same as being able to play that piece. Yeah, it's just cool. I think we all need something a little bit more French, possibly. Maybe as broad as that. Anything French would do after that. Probably. Such a lovely exotic change of colour and timbre as French music gives us. But I think this next one is going to be particularly soothing because it's Debussy's Reverie, which I'm sure many of you know. It's one of his best loved works, I would say, along with the Arabesque and Clair de Lune. Which is funny, really, because he didn't think a lot of it. He didn't even particularly care about it when he wrote it. He wrote it purely to earn money, and he was almost annoyed by how well it did and how in demand it was. I guess Debussy was a tricky man in some ways of his personality, but I guess that's also the idea that his musical language evolved so far beyond this piece that probably looking back it seemed to him very immature and juvenile, because the Debussy of the Impressionist era of swirls of abstract sound and colour is not this, but that doesn't make this any the less special for it. Reverie means daydream, and I might just explore a few of the ways that I think he helps us get lost in ourselves in this piece. So even if we take the very beginning and the opening introduction in the left hand. I think it's very cool that we're doing this alongside the Chopin, because he's not doing a dissimilar thing to what Chopin was doing. He's depriving us of the main beats of the bar, and he's instead giving a little bit of weight to some of the weakest parts of the bar. So now we're going 1, 2, 3, 4. So we would expect it to be 1, 2, 3, 4. But he's not giving us anything on 3, like not even a note at all, or on 1, other than the first note of the piece. So we get this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3. And when I take away the counting, that's how immediately, just from such a simple introduction, he makes us feel lost in time and space, because we don't know where we are. We're also in F major, apparently. You certainly wouldn't know it from that introduction where he starts in G minor. And although we haven't had a reference point yet, because he starts in what we call a first inversion chord, we feel very uncertain. So G minor should be like this. But as soon as we play it like this, feels a little bit more airborne. And that's, again, not a coincidence. And he does this incredible thing at the beginning, where he starts in G minor, then shifts everything down one space, one more, and then we're home in our F major. And so the beginning, 8 bars, feels like this suspended in time introduction while we just gradually, almost like someone going under hypnosis. The first 8 bars, you're slowly going, and then on the 8th, you're there, you enter the parallel universe. A little kind of geeky aside is that he starts with this very nice, famous melody. But actually it's rather ingenious, because those first 2 notes is just the flip, is just the mirror image of the top of the left-hand accompaniment. So he's kind of already prepared us subconsciously for the opening melody. when it comes in, it doesn't feel alien. It feels like it's a tune we've heard before. Genius tactic. What else could I say? There's a clear second theme, which is here. Now again, this isn't a theme that is totally alien to us, right? In the main theme, we've had this rising scale figure, and so what do we get here? He flips a mirror image on it again, and we have a falling scale figure that then does rise back up. So everything, rather like maybe a daydream, everything is kind of interconnected. And have we heard it before? And where really am I? Just incredible. The next important moment I think to draw your attention to is the first time in the piece where these rippling quavers stop. So we've had constant kind of flowing rippling, and then suddenly music becomes incredibly what we call homophonic, so when all the notes are moving at the same time, it becomes very blocky and much more vertical, actually, whereas before we've been travelling very horizontally. I don't know what exactly is in his mind here. To me, it feels a little bit like this could be us starting to wake up, this starting to return to reality. Like a far-off sound in the distance reminding us of reality. And then what he does with it is he lets that happen one more time, and then he uses it to change key to a totally unrelated key. He's like, nope, I'm not ready to wake up yet. We're going to go here. And from F major, we go to E major. And there's barely anywhere less. Well, I say F major, sorry, we're in D minor here. And then we go suddenly to E major, not a very connected key at all. And we dream some more. And then the opening comes back and leads us right through to the end, when this melody does come back again, much heavier and darker. And what key is that in? That's in G minor. So that's exactly where we started the piece. So again, just another incredible device to tie it together. So we wonder why these pieces are so famous. Why is Debussy's Reverie so famous? Why does everyone love it so much? It's not coincidence. It's these genius compositional devices that we're not aware of when we listen to it, unless someone like me has just spilled the beans, but has an effect on us to make us spellbound. Marvellous piece of music. This is for Mark. Not your first request, my friend. Maybe not your last, but you keep requesting such beautiful pieces that what am I going to do? This is with much love for you and Anton. think an important lesson we all have to learn as, I don't want to say creatives, it sounds too pretentious, but just musicians, people who share something we work at very hard with other people, is to accept praise. And I think it's all too easy sometimes, I discuss this often with my students, to reject people's praise because you feel as if what you've done has not been worthy of it, because possibly you haven't reached your own very high standards. And what a sad thing that is, not to be able to accept that, and how actually it actually sometimes ruins the experience for the audience member who's offering you the praise if you then tell them how misguided they are and how awful the playing was. And I just was reminded of it then playing the Debussy. What a shame that he couldn't just delight in how much joy his music, that piece, was bringing to people. And he had to go around saying what a rotten piece it was and how disappointed he was with it. But it doesn't stop it being it doesn't stop it being so marvelous. Just an observation. We're going to finish with a little bit of a curveball, which I'm ecstatic about, really, because I love discovering new pieces, and especially incredible new pieces. I also think it's important when we do these miniature concerts that at least one of the pieces is pretty unknown, and that we don't just stick to the classics. This all came about really as a result of all of the Black Lives Matter developments in the US not so long ago. And I remember doing a show from here just after, saying the right things, that it's important that we listen to our friends in the BAME community and that we hear their grievances and act on them when we can and support them and show solidarity, but that it's also important for us to try and illuminate those members of the BAME community who are maybe overlined in industries that traditionally have not really lent much towards their ethnicity. And I think classical music, I hate to say it, probably falls as heavily into that category as any other. So on the back of that, it was wonderful when Gabby discovered this incredible piece by Margaret Bonds called Troubled Water, and was immediately like, okay, JP, this is perfect. You can give some exposure to someone who not many people have heard of, but is incredible, and that's exactly what you should be doing. And combined with that marvellous inspiration with the fact that the music was incredibly expensive to get hold of, and so a very generous one of you, who wanted to remain anonymous, very kindly bought the music for me, which came over from the States. Here we are, and I'm really excited to share it with you now. She was, by all accounts, a trailblazer. She was the first African-American woman to play a concerto with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and she was right at the forefront of promoting African-American composers and musicians in her time. She also fell heavily in with the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King as that began to gather pace. She has a fascinating background and story. She was the child of a father who was himself an activist and very heavily involved in community work, and a mother who was more of a creative, and there would frequently be gatherings of musicians and artists and poets in the house. So she really had this incredible blend of someone who felt a strong sense of social responsibility, but also had a phenomenal musical training and background. And what's interesting is that her focus changed as Martin Luther King's movement grew. She started composing music explicitly chiming in with that. My favourite anecdote on this front was that I learned she composed a song called Three Wise Monkeys, referring to see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And each monkey is explicitly referred to in the song as a racist white politician of the time. So she was pretty subversive, pretty edgy, certainly not afraid to put people's noses out of joint, which I think is exactly how we should be as artists. So she's a bit of a hero, really, and it makes me feel bad I hadn't heard of her sooner, but maybe that's kind of the point, that I hadn't. But here she is now, and I'm not stopping with this piece. I'm desperate to dig up more of her compositions and to hopefully share more of them with you in the future. So this piece is called Troubled Water, and it borrows its main theme from a Negro spiritual. Wade in the Water, I think? Yeah, Wade in the Water. So these were songs that the slaves would sing to each other, with each other, as they worked. But it wasn't quite as simple as that. They would often have hidden messages in. So the lyrics of this are fairly standard. Wade in the water, children. God's going to trouble the water. And there is a biblical reference here to the Exodus, the Exodus from Egypt in the Old Testament, where it was said that God would trouble the water, and then anyone who stepped into the troubled water would immediately be cleansed of their ailments. But there was a hidden message as well. This was subtly, cryptically, there we go, cryptically referring to the Underground Railroad, which was one's not exactly sure, because there's not a lot of actual evidence about it, one's not exactly sure how organised it was, but it was some kind of mechanism whereby slaves who managed to escape were then smuggled north into Canada to have their freedom. It was largely organised by free blacks, by the clergy, and also by Quakers. And as a sign of the gulf in education at the time, and I guess a sign of the social injustice, right? All of the written documents we have about it come mostly from Quakers, well, certainly from white educated people. And so we sadly don't have a lot of information about it. But the coded message was wade in the water, i.e. when you're fleeing, find the waterways, because then the dogs won't be able to pick up your scent. So this is a piece deeply in chime with that movement and with that struggle. It's in roughly 3 sections. She opens with a kind of slightly restless. I think the feeling of the trouble comes across right at the beginning, because she gives us what we call a syncopated introduction, which is where she's stressing, like lots of the pieces today, stressing weaker beats. But here it's a little bit cooler, it's a little bit more funky. We can already feel the jazz that she was influenced by, and by the Negro spiritual style that was very much present in her music. One quick anecdote, because I only found out this today and I think it's pretty crazy. Speaking of Negro spirituals, the English rugby team's anthem, Swing Low Sweet Chariot, that I've certainly thundered many times in the past, has its origins as a Negro spiritual, which I had no idea about, and I think it's crazy how we've kind of taken that to be used for something so far away from where it originally came from without any of us knowing why. But that's just an aside. Thought you'd be interested. There's a central section where we flip to the major, and then it becomes more improvisatory. So the melody is still going on, but it's a little bit more hidden. And the music becomes much more watery, if you like, much more ripply. Shortly after this section, there comes what I feel like, in this music anyway, sounds to me like a call to arms. The music becomes a little bit more strident, and there's kind of this contrast between high music and low music. And the low music is this kind of quite insistent refrain, like this. So here's the high music. And she manages to get this incredible feeling of, I think, low voices singing together. In this with this very interesting writing, where in the left hand she writes only in fifths, and in the right hand only in fourths. And I think that's why this is so effective at capturing that kind of sound world. Very cool, interesting voicing. Yeah. The opening theme comes back, and then she kind of blends 2 things together. So she has the opening theme screaming out at the top here, while at the bottom, and everything crescendos to this marvellous climax at the end. I always know when we're onto a winner, because when I'm preparing it, Andy wanders through the room and goes, "What's that? What's that? That sounds amazing." And right from sort of day 2 of finding this piece, I had Andy going, "Oh, that that's a cracker. And so, absolutely spot on. It is indeed. Very much hope you enjoy it. This is for Gabby, of course, and our anonymous donor. Thank you very much. There we are. Another concert comes to an end. It's warm. Thank you very much for watching. It's been a pleasure, really. Highlight of my life, or one of, at the moment, is bringing this music to you every fortnight. And I'm also releasing odds and sods every now and then, little videos here and there. So best way to keep up to date with all of that is to get onto the channel, Cats, Chats and 88 Keys, and hit subscribe. And the other beautiful little click of the mouse you can do is just to nudge that thumbs up button just below your video, or give it a like on Facebook. The ticket link is there. Yeah, please, if you've enjoyed tonight, it doesn't matter if you can't afford much or anything really. Just something would be lovely. But if you can't, then that's also lovely. I'm really happy you joined us for this concert. The next one will be in 2 weeks. I think it's the 31st. And I've got 2 absolute stonkers for you with an extra bit of special personal touch thrown in. There's a hook. Thanks again. Have a lovely weekend. I need a beer, and see you next time. Cheers.